Why weren't the disciples to dispute among themselves as to who was the greatest? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Luke on Walking Through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Luke chapter 22. We're going to be reading from verses 24 to 30. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Luke 22, beginning at verse 24. Now there was also a dispute among them as to which of them should be considered the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. But not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he who governs as he who serves. For who is greater, he who sits at the table, or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table? Yet I am among you as the one who serves. But you are those who have continued with me in my trials, and I bestow on you a kingdom, just as my Father bestowed one upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. In our last lesson, we had Jesus sitting down with his disciples for his final meal with them. As we discussed, this was not the official Passover meal with the lamb, for that would be the next night, but a meal that took place at the beginning of the 14th day of Nisan, the day that the Passover lamb would be killed. It is at this meal that Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, the meal that future disciples would partake of in the kingdom to remember the death of Jesus. According to the book of Acts and 1 Corinthians, this meal took place every Sunday when the disciples gathered together as the church. The Lord's Supper itself was simple. It consisted of unleavened bread, which represented the body of Jesus that was nailed to the cross, and fruit of the vine, grape juice, which represented the blood shed by Christ for the forgiveness of sins, the blood that inaugurated the new covenant. Now perhaps it was the mention of the kingdom during Jesus' talk about the Lord's Supper that initiated the disciples' long-time dispute as to who would be the greatest in that kingdom. In Luke, we last saw this contention in Luke 9, but we've seen it in all of our other studies of the Gospels. Jesus has answered this question in numerous ways, with Luke telling us that he who is least among you would be great. That the disciples were still arguing over this point still shows us that they had a misunderstanding about the kingdom, one that still persists among those claiming to be Christians to this day. The disciples thought that the kingdom was going to be an earthly kingdom that would soon be established. Some people today still believe this. Jesus will tell us in John that his kingdom was not of this world. What does that mean? It means that his kingdom was not like the kingdoms of this world, which are generally established through war. His kingdoms would consist of people from this world, those people in this world who surrender their lives to him through faith and obedience to his word, but there was going to be no earthly headquarters. It was going to be a spiritual kingdom made up of spiritual priests offering spiritual sacrifices to God. Jesus would rule over this kingdom from heaven until the final resurrection, the judgment day, according to 1 Corinthians 15. That means that Jesus' kingdom exists today. When did it begin? When we get to Acts 2, the Lord willing in future studies, we'll find that the kingdom began on the first day of Pentecost following Jesus' death and has continued on since then. When Jesus comes again, it will not be to establish a kingdom. It will be to collect his saints, both living and dead, and take them to heaven, where he will hand the kingdom to God the Father, who will then rule over this kingdom preeminently for all of eternity from heaven. So when it came to the kingdom, Jesus again had to correct his disciples. Jesus told them that the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over their subjects and want their subjects to view them as benefactors. A benefactor is a doer of good, or one who brings a blessing. So the attitude of the kings of the Gentiles was one that they wanted honor. Such was not to be so among the disciples. The one who would be greatest among them, let him be as the younger not being in positions of power, and let he who governs as he who serves. In other words, Jesus wanted his disciples not to take positions of power, but positions of servants. Jesus asked, who is greater, he who sits at the table or the one who serves? It is obvious that the one who sits at the table is greater. Yet Jesus, who most certainly is greater than all because he is God, He didn't come to sit at the table. He came to serve. The disciples had witnessed Jesus now for over 3 years. They had seen the trials that he went through, the hardships, and now Jesus wanted them to follow in his footsteps. Because Jesus had come as a servant and obeyed the Father in all things, Jesus was going to be given a kingdom to rule over. If the disciples followed Jesus' example, they would be part of that kingdom and get to sit at the table and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, this passage confuses people, and I'm not going to say that I have the definite answer here as to what Jesus is saying. But are the disciples going to be given a prominent place in the kingdom? In a sense, yes, and in a sense, no. They would be saved just like any other person, making them equal with other people in terms of salvation. However, the apostles were the ones who would be revealing the gospel to people. Their words had authority, not because they had their own authority, but because Jesus spoke through them by means of the Holy Spirit. Many of the words that we have in our New Testaments are the words of the apostles spoken through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. These are the words that will judge us all. So in that sense, they were given a prominent place in the kingdom. But they obtained that place by being servants, not by competing with one another to see who would be the greatest. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Luke chapter 22, verses 31 to 38, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.